please listen carefully. Distinguished head of state and government, honorable ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. There are moments in history when leaders gather simply to discuss policies. I believe today belongs to the second time. For more than 40 years, Europe has lived with division. We became accustomed to maps marked by thick lines, to cities separated by economic constraint laws, to families divided by ideology rather than distance. An entire generation grew up believing that the Iron Curtain was not merely a political reality, but a permanent feature for our country. Yet, history has a remarkable habit of surprising those who claim certainty. Less than a year ago, few political analysts imagined that the Berlin Wall will disappear. Even fewer believed that the people of Central and Eastern Europe will peacefully reclaim freedoms that had been denied to the deceased. And yet, here we are. Now, because a great war was fought, not because one nation conquered another, but because millions of ordinary men and women quietly demonstrated a truth that no government, no army, and no ideology can suppress forever. Freedom has extraordinary patience. A few months ago, I was shown a photograph taken in Berlin. It was not a photograph of soldiers. It was not a photograph of politicians. It showed an elderly man standing beside a young university student, like neither of them knew each other. One held a small hammer, the other carried a chisel borrowed from a new construction site. Together, they chipped away at the same piece of the Berlin. One generation had spent all of its life watching that wall rise, the other had never known a Europe without it. For a brief moment, age, profession, language, and background meant absolutely nothing. Both simply wished to remove one more stone from a structure that had stood far longer than it deserved. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes history is not written by presidents. Sometimes it's written by ordinary people carrying ordinary tools. As we meet today, newspapers around the world ask fascinating questions. What will NATO do now? Some even ask another. Does NATO still have purpose? I found these questions understandable. After all, they came from people who believed NATO existed only because the Soviet Union existed. But that was never the truth. NATO was never founded because we desired confrontation. It was founded because Europe deserves security, because the world deserves security. It was founded because democracies understood a lesson learned at terrible cost, that peace cannot survive on hope alone. Peace must also be protected. Our alliance has never measured its success by the number of wars it has fought. Instead, we measure success by the wars that never happened. The wars are the bad ones, not the congrats. For over 4 decades, no NATO member has gone to war against NATO member. So it's a good thing. But entire generations have grown up without witnessing another catastrophe, like those that devastated Europe twice during the century. That is not an accident. That is collective security working exactly as it was intended. Some have described NATO as merely another military bloc. With respect, history tells a different story to us. Military alliance built upon fear required constant force to survive. Military alliances built upon trust require only continued confidence. Our members remain because they choose to remain. No tanks stand outside the parliament of our member states. No government has ever been compelled to stay behind barbed wire. No capital has ever required foreign troops to remind its citizens where their loyalty belongs. That distinction is not a small one. It is perhaps the greatest distinction of all time. There is an old saying, a bridge proves its value only when people choose to cross it. For 41 years, or 43, I don't know, NATO has been the bridge. A bridge between North Atlantic and North America and Europe. A bridge between security and prosperity. A bridge between nations that once marked one another, but later discovered that cooperating is far less expensive than conflict. Think about that for a moment. Only 45 years ago, much of Europe lay in ruins, cities were burning, people were dying, economies had collapsed, millions had lost their homes, millions more had lost their lives. Today, representatives of former enemies sit around the same table, not because history has been forgotten, but because history has been learned. That is one of civilization's greatest achievements. Of course, we should not mistake today's optimism for the end of responsibility. History rarely ends, it simply changes chapters. Yes, communist governments throughout history are changing at astonishing speed. We can see that. Yes, reforms once considered impossible are now daily headlines. Yes, walls are falling. But building a wall is much easier than building lasting peace. Freedom, once achieved, must be defended. Democracy, once gained, must be strengthened and protected. And stability, once restored, must never be taken for granted. A couple of time ago, we adopted the London Declaration. Some observers have already called it the beginning of a new era. I believe they're correct. Yet, I will add something further. The London Declaration is not a celebration of victory over an enemy. It was an invitation. An invitation to replace suspicion with dialogue. An invitation to replace controllation with cooperation. An invitation to build Europe where security belongs to all responsible nations willing to pursue peace. This is not weakness. This is competence. Only those who truly believe in their principles can afford to extend and open a NATO extension. That's NATO today, not because we have forgotten the past, but because we are determined to build a better future. Distinguished ambassadors, as we began our discussion, I ask each of you to remember one simple truth. Institutions do not shape history by themselves. People do. Decisions taken inside this chamber over the coming hours may influence millions who will never know our names. That responsibility should humble us, but it should also inspire us, because opportunities like this do not appear often. History has opened the door to us. The question before us is remarkably simple. Will we have the wisdom to walk through it together? And it's a great question. Think about it. Distinguished diaries, ambassadors and excellencies. Before we decide where Europe should go next, we must first understand where it has come from. The Cold War was never simply a competition between two military alliances. One of them was weak, but it was a competition between two ideas. One believed that government should earn the trust of their people, the other believed that government could demand it. One trusted free debate, the other feared free thought. One accepted disagreement as a sign of strength, the other treated disagreement as a threat to its own survival. For over 40 years, these two visions stood face to face across our continent. Neither side doubted the seriousness of the moment. Neither side underestimated the consequences of failure. And yet, despite countless crises, from Berlin to Cuba, from Hungary to Afghanistan, like we see, the peace in Europe has endured lessons. The achievement should never be underestimated. When NATO was founded in 1994, Europe was exhausted. Factories had become ruins. Railways had become battlefields, like I said. Entire cities had disappeared. I often think about the British engineer, whose diary I once read. He had survived the Second World War, repairing bridges destroyed by training armies. Years later, someone asked him whether rebuilding those bridges had been difficult. He smiled and replied, "Bridges were easy. Convincing people to cross them again, that was a difficult part." Ladies and gentlemen, NATO has spent 41 years building bridges, not only between countries, between trust and security, between former enemies, hope and reality, people to eagles. There are those who believe our greatest achievement was our military strength. I respectfully disagree. Our greatest achievement was making military strength unnecessary. A strong alliance discourages aggression before the first shot is ever fired. A united alliance prevents conflicts that history books never need to describe. Every child who grew up with hearing, a bright science, every family that never had to abandon their home, every election conducted without foreign intimidation. These are victories. Perhaps they are the greatest victories of all. History rarely builds monuments to wars that never happened. Yet they are often the most important triumphs. Some critics have claimed that NATO was merely fortunate that deterrence worked, fortunate that nuclear weapons were never used, fortunate that the Cold War remained cold as usual. I would suggest another explanation. Preparation is often mistaken for luck when democracies stand together, when commitments are credible, when aggression carries unacceptable consequences. Peace becomes considerably more likely. That is not fortune. That is responsibility. Of course, every alliance faces moments of disagreement. We have debated strategy. We have debated budgets and deployments. Sometimes our discussions have lasted for longer than anyone else. Like sometimes. I suspect several foreign ministers in this room will gladly confirm that observation. But let us remember something important. Free nations agree because free nations are allowed to argue. It's important. Free nations argue because free nations are allowed to argue. Consensus achieved through discussion is infinitely stronger than obedience achieved through fear. The strength of NATO has never been that 16 governments think exactly alike. Our strength is that 16 sovereign democracies continue choosing cooperation despite their differences. This is unity. It's uniformity. It's not uniformity. Permit me one small observation. During the past few months, I have read numerous newspapers articles asking whether NATO has become obsolete. Curiously, I have noticed that these predictions appear almost every decade, and somehow NATO continues to arrive at work the following morning. Give me a second. Perhaps institutions built upon shared values have a habit of surviving longer than institutions built upon shared fears, and also some red countries. As reforms spread across Eastern Europe, many have understandably celebrated. So have I. No, responsible leaders should view the expansion of freedom. Freedom is not a beauty. It's not a threat. It's not an act of hostility. Freedom is simply the natural conduct to which people return once fear begins to disappear. That is why no government should fear free elections. No government should fear independent newspapers and fear citizens asking difficult questions. A confident nation welcomes questions. Only insecure systems attempt to silence them with chains initiated under glasnost and patriarchal recognition. They repudiate courage. Admitting that reform is necessary is never easy, especially for government accused of claiming perfection. We should welcome every sincere effort to reduce tension. We should encourage dialogue wherever dialogue is possible. But let us also remember an important lesson. Reform does not create truth. It merely allows truth to become visible. The desire for liberty did not suddenly appear in Eastern Europe last year. It had always been there. It simply waited for the opportunity to speak loud. I recently spoke with a young diplomat from Central Europe. He told me something I remember the best times. Mr. Secretary General, he said, we did not wake up one morning wanting a different geography. We woke up viewing a different future, waiting for a different future. So, that simple sentence explains far more than countless political analysis. People rarely risk everything merely for economic statistics. They risk everything for dignity, for opportunity, for a chance to decide their own future. Those aspirations are neither Western nor Eastern. These are simply human. As we witness these extraordinary transformations, we should resist one dangerous temptation: triumphalism, like I said before. History has humbled every generation that believed it had solved every problem. The purpose of NATO had never been to celebrate another nation's difficulties, nor should we mistake today's options for permanent stability. Political systems may change overnight. Trust does not. Economic reforms require patience. Democratic institutions require experience. Peace requires constant attention. The end of one confrontation does not guarantee the absence of another. A And this brings us to the challenge before us. Across much of Europe, barriers are disappearing. Old rivalries seem to be fading, but elsewhere, different forces are beginning to emerge. Nationalism and communism.
Communism.
Economic studies, please. Economic uncertainty. Political fragmentation and administration. History reminds us that instability regularly announced itself with great fanfare. It often begins with ordinary species, ordinary elections, ordinary political disagreements. Until one day, everyone realizes that ordinary disagreements have become extraordinary dangerous. That is why this summit matters. That is why this committee matters. We are not gathered merely to congratulate ourselves on surviving the Cold War. We are gathered because history is asking a new question. If NATO successfully preserved peace during an age confrontation, can it also preserve peace during an age certainty? I believe the answer was yes. Not because the future will be easy, but because this alliance has repeatedly demonstrated something more valuable than military strength. It's more valuable than military. It has demonstrated political wisdom, and in the years ahead, wisdom may prove to be our most important strategic resource. Distinguished heads of states, this is words to you, not special. Wisdom. For the case, Europe's political map appeared frozen. Borders looked permanent. Governments appeared immobile. Entire alliances convinced themselves that history had reached its final destination. Yet, history has a remarkable sense of humor. Just when politicians began believing that nothing will ever change. But everything changes. Yes, it will. Only a few years ago, many experts confidently predicted that Germany would remain divided for generations. Children were born in Berlin, believing that constraint walls were simply part of Europe. An entire generation accepted this checkpoint, watchtowers, and barbed wire as an ordinary feature of Europe. How extraordinary is it that today we discuss not how to manage Germany's division, but how to welcome Germany's reunification. This is more than a political event. It's a reminder that no artificial border can survive forever when it stands against the will of an entire people, an entire nation. Some walls are built from concentrate. Others are built from stratosphere. History eventually removes both. I was reminded of his several months ago. A journalist asked an elderly woman in East Berlin what she intended to do after crossing into the West for the first time. The reporter accepted dramatic answers. Perhaps she would speak about politics, perhaps about ideology. Instead, she smiled and quietly replied, "I only want to visit my sister. We have waited 28 years for dinner. 28 years. Not for revolution, not for revenge, just for dinner." Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes political decisions separate families far longer than they separate governments. And sometimes the greatest victory of diplomacy is allowing ordinary life to become ordinary once again. The reunification of Germany is NATO's victory over other nations. Nor should it ever be described that way. It's Europe's victory over its own divisions. For generations, Germany represented the front line of confrontation. Today, it has the opportunity to become the front line of cooperation. That transformation should inspire every nation representative. Naturally, such profound change also raises understandable questions. Some ask whether a united Germany will once again become the powerful. History teaches us that such concerns deserve respect. The tragedies of the century remains painfully close to our memories. But there is one crucial difference between today's Germany and that of previous generations. Today's Germany is firmly anchored to democratic institutions. It's surrounded not by enemies, but by allies. It does not seek dominance, it seeks partnership. That difference changes everything. Strong democracies do not threaten Europe, they strengthen it. The same cannot be said of every institution created during the Cold War. Across Europe, Eastern Europe, another alliance now faces a very different future. Warsaw Pact once represented itself as the guardian of collective security, yet history has asked one uncomfortable question. If an alliance exists to protect its members, I'm going to repeat it. If an alliance exists to protect its members, why has it so often been remembered for controlling them? It's difficult to speak of voluntary unity when unity requires military intervention. Hungary remembers, Czechoslovakia remembers, history remembers. History will never forget. An alliance powers its character not when everything goes according to plan. It proves its character when one of its own members dares to disagree. For more than 40 years, NATO has never had to pressure its members with force. Our debates have often been difficult, sometimes frustrating, occasionally exhausting. I suspect more than one representative here has wished our meetings ended several hours earlier, unfortunately. But every disagreement concluded around the conference table, not beneath the shadow of armored divisions. This is not a coincidence. This is democracy. Some observers have suggested that because tensions are decreasing, military alliances are becoming unnecessary. I respectfully challenge that assumption. Peace does not eliminate the need for security. Peace changed the purpose of security. For 40 years, NATO prevented conflict through deterrence. Now, we must preserve peace through dialogue, cooperation, and stability. Our missions are evolving. It's not disappearing. The strongest institutions are not those that refuse to change. They are those that adapt without abandoning their principles. Yesterday, through the London Declaration, a couple of time ago, through the London Declaration, we extended the hand instead of raising a fist. Learn that good. We extended a hand instead of raising a fist. That decision was named singular for NATO. Confidence allows generosity. Only those certain of their own value can sincerely invite former rivals to build a common future. Some may interpret this weakness. I see precisely the opposite. History has repeatedly demonstrated that insecure governments build higher walls. Confident nations build longer tables. Today, this alliance has chosen the table. Yet let us confuse optimism with certainty. Europe is changing faster than any of us predicted. All governments are disappearing, new political parties are emerging. Economies are struggling to reinvent themselves. Millions of people are discovering freedom for the first time. Freedom is accelerating, but freedom also carries responsibility. Democracy is not established the moment ballots are counted. It must be protected long after elections have ended. Institutions must earn public trust. Laws must apply with courage. Minorities must feel secure. The leaders must remember that popularity is temporary, while responsibility is permanent. There is another lesson history quietly offers us. When great empires weaken, smaller conflicts often become stronger. If one of source tension disappears, another frequently takes its place. Power vacuums invite uncertainty. Economic hardship encourages extremism. Political conviction gives ambitious men dangerous opportunities. History rarely remains empty for long. If responsible leadership does not fill the vacuum, someone else will eventually. This is why I urge every delegation not to become distracted by today's celebration. Yes, we should welcome the remarkable changes unfolding across our continent. Yes, we should acknowledge the courage shown by countless citizens who demanded peace. But our responsibility does not end with applause. It begins there. Because somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the celebrations, beyond the cameras, new tensions are already beginning to emerge. They are quieter, more complicated, less visible, but no less dangerous. How many minutes have passed?
Mr. Secretary General, a total of 24 minutes and 40 seconds have passed.
Okay. We are going to talk about that much also. I mean the half. Maybe close the door, please.
Cool.
So let me continue. one country in particular deserves our closest attention. A nation that spent decades balancing different religions, languages, cultures, and identities under a single federal structure. A nation admired by many for maintaining unity where others expected division. A nation now standing at a dangerous crossroads, Yugoslavia. For years, it appeared to defy the division that shaped the rest of Europe. Today, however, the very foundations of that unity are beginning to crack. Economic hardship has dependent political frustration. Nationalist rhetoric grows louder with each passing moment. Trust between republics is slowly giving way to suspicion. It's bad. The institutions that once held the federation together are strengthening command confidence. No responsible observer should ignore these warning signs. History has taught us that political crises rarely begin with gunfire. They began with words, then mistrust, then fear. Only afterwards the weapon appeared. Distinguished ambassadors, the Cold War may be ended, but peace has not become automatic. If anything, our responsibilities have become greater. For the first time in the case, Europe has an opportunity to build a lasting peace. It will be a profound tragedy if we allow new divisions to replace the old ones. The ask before us is no longer simply preventing East from confronting West. It's preventing neighbors from becoming enemies. And that challenge may prove even more demanding than the one we have just overcome. There's an old proverb that says it's just the same. The strongest trees do not fall because of one storm. They fall because decay has been growing inside for years. When we look at Yugoslavia, we looked at it, we must resist the temptation to believe that this challenge appeared overnight. They did not. Difficulties before us were not born yesterday. Nor did they begin with one speech, one election, or one political leader. Like many crises throughout history, they developed quite quietly, year after year, compromise after compromise, warning after warning, until today. When ignoring them is no longer an option for decay, Yugoslavia occupied a unique place in Europe. It was neither a member of NATO nor the Warsaw Pact. It chose its own path. We respect that. It became one of the leading voices of the non-aligned movement. Many believe this position gave Yugoslavia an unusual advantage. It could speak with both East and West. Trade it well. Learn from it. And perhaps, most importantly, avoid becoming dependent one either. For many years, that strategy appeared remarkably successful. It became an example often discussed in diplomatic circles, a bridge between two competing worlds. I remember speaking with a senior diplomat many years ago. He described Yugoslavia as a rather memorable day. He said, Europe has many houses, some stand on side of the river, others stand on the opposite bank. Yugoslavia chose to build its house in the middle of the bridge. At the time, I admired that image. Today, I found myself asking another question. What happens when the bridge itself begins to shake? Marshal Tito deserved recognition for one undeniable achievement. He governed the federation unlike almost any other in Europe. Different languages, religions, and histories. And some passed from the World War II. Yet, for decades, those differences remained under one federal rule that required remarkably political skill. No fair observer should deny it. But history also teaches us another lesson. Exceptional leaders often solve problems personally. Great institutions solve them permanently. And there is a profound difference between the two. Since Tito's passing in the 80s, Yugoslavia has searched for a new balance. The rotating presidency was designed to guarantee equal. The constitution promised decentralization. Every republic received greater authority. Every nation expects greatest favors. On paper, it appeared elegant. In practice, consensus became increasingly difficult. Every important decision required agreement. Every disagreement became a nation dispute. Every compromise became harder than the last. Sometimes the greatest weakness of a political system is is not that it gives too much power to the one. Sometimes it gives too little ability to anyone. Economic difficulties have only intensified these political challenges. Inflation has climbed. Foreign debt has grown. Unemployment has expanded. Confidence has declined. No country is immune to economic hardship. We know that well. But history repeatedly demonstrates that economic uncertainty often becomes fertile ground for political extremism when families lose confidence in tomorrow. They begin searching for simple answers, unfortunately. Simple answers are often offered by dangerous people. There's another lesson that deserves our attention. National identity is one of humanity's oldest and stronger forces. It can inspire extraordinary courage. It can preserve cultural across centuries. It can unite communities through unimaginable hardship. But when political ambition begins manipulating national identity, patriarchy slowly transforms into division. Pride becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes hostility. And hostility eventually convinces neighbors that they have always been enemies. That is one of history's oldest tragedies. Not long ago. And Not long ago, I met a young student from Sarajevo during a conference. He spoke excellent English. He smiled often. When I asked where he came from, he answered simply, Yugoslavia. Then he paused. After a few seconds, he laughed quietly and added, although, lady everyone, keep asking me which part. The room laughed with him, but I could not, because beneath his humor was uncertainty. When young people begin questioning identities, they never questioned before. Responsible leaders should pay attention. Today, throughout Yugoslavia, political conversations are becoming increasingly emotional. Economic debates quickly become constitutional debates. Constitutional debates become national debates. National debates become historical debates. And we can see that. Soon, citizens stop asking, how can we improve our future? And begin asking, who is responsible for our past? Always blame someone. History can be an excellent teacher. It becomes a terrible politician. This is why language matters, words matter. Every speech delivered by a public official carries consequences. Every newspaper headline shapes public opinion. Every accusation repeated often enough eventually becomes accepted as truth by someone. Leaders possess an extraordinary ability. They can calm fear, or they can multiply it. They can encourage compromise, or they can reward confrontation. History rarely judges leaders only by one speech they delivered. It judges them by the emotions those speeches created. As representatives of the Atlantic Alliance, we must approach these developments with both wisdom and pain. We are not gathered here to choose winners among Yugoslavia's republics. We are not here to withdraw borders. Nor are we here to interfere in matters that remain, first and foremost, the responsibility of Yugoslavia's own leaders. But we also cannot pretend that instability in the heart of Europe concerns only one nation. It does not. History has repeatedly shown that European crises rarely remain confident within European borders. Refugees cross frontiers, economic disruptions spread, political instability inspires imitation as well. The consequences of failure never stop politely at custom checkpoints. We cannot. Our responsibility, therefore, is not to predict conflict. Our responsibility is to prevent it. That requires patience, dialogue, diplomacy, and above all, the willingness to listen before circumstances make listening impossible. NATO was created to defend peace. In this new Europe, defending peace may require something more difficult than military preparedness. It may require political imagination, the courage to recognize danger before it becomes disaster, the wisdom to speak while others remain silent, and the patience to negotiate while others demand immediate victory. that was different. Not so. Armies could be counted, missiles could be photographed, military exercise could be observed. Today's challenges are different. The dangers now growing inside Yugoslavia cannot be measured by satellites. They cannot be counted in division or text. They exist in a mistrust, in fear, in political paralysis. And those dangers, if ignored, may prove every bit as destructive as those we spent decades preparing to deter. So let me leave you with one final thought before we begin our deliberation. The 20th century has already taught Europe twice the terrible cost of waiting too long. Let us ensure that the 21st century remembers us not as the leaders who recreated tragedy, but as leaders who had the wisdom to prevent it. Distinguished head of state, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, and dogs. There is a tendency in international politics to believe peace is an event. It's not. Peace is a process. It's an achievement. It must be renewed every day, protected every day, earned every day. The absence of war is not by itself the presence of peace. Europe learned that lesson after the First World War. Again and again and again. The second. We must never be forced to learn in a third time. As we sit in London, I cannot help but think about the founders of this alliance. Many of them had walked through cities reduced to ash. Many had buried friends, brothers, fathers, and sons. None of them founded NATO because they loved military alliances. They founded NATO because they hated war. There's an important difference. Sometimes critics forget that. They see our aircraft, our ships, our soldiers, but they fail to see what those men and women are protecting. No territorial law, no governmental law, but the possibility to another generation of Europe might never have to experience what the last one endured. That has always been our mission, and it will always. And it remains our mission today. Several weeks ago, a young reporter asked me a question. Again, an anecdote. Mr. Secretary General, he said, if the Cold War is ending, should NATO celebrate? It is a thoughtful question. I answered her honestly. Him honestly. No. He looked surprised. So I continued. We shall be grateful. There is a difference. Victory encourages pride. Gratitude encourages responsibility. And today, responsibility is exactly what Europe requires. Because let us be honest with ourselves. The end of the Cold War does not mean the end of uncertainty. It simply means uncertainty has changed its shape. Yesterday, we worried about confrontation between military blocs. Tomorrow, we may face instability born from political collapse, economic desperation, ethnic division, or failed leadership, or dictatorship. I don't know. We can see. Those dangers carry different names, but they threaten peace just the same. For more than 4 decades, NATO's strategy was remarkably clear. Prevent aggression, maintain credible deterrence, protect every inch of allied territory. That mission united us. Today, however, our task is becoming more complex. How should NATO respond when instability does not arrive in the form of invading armies? How do we preserve security when the greatest dangers emerge from inside states rather than outside? How should democracies react when hatred spreads faster than diplomacy? These are not theoretical questions. They are rapidly becoming practical ones, unfortunately. And history rarely grants us the luxury to unlimited time. Allow me to share another story. During my years in public service, I once visited a military academy. A young cadet approached me after my speech, and he seemed nervous. So, what is the most important weapon NATO possesses? I expected him to guess. Perhaps aircraft, missiles, nuclear deterrence. I asked him what he thought. He looked around the room and quietly answered, trust. I smiled, because he was absolutely right. Missiles can deter armies. Trust prevents wars. Without trust, every military exercise appears threatening. Every diplomatic meeting feels suspicious. Every political disagreement becomes a crisis. Trust is visible. Yes, it is the strongest foundation any alliance can possess. The Trump has carried this alliance through Berlin, through Cuba, through countless moments when miscalculations could have changed history forever. It carried us through periods of disagreement among ourselves, because we understood something fundamental. Security cannot exist without confidence. Confidence cannot exist without honesty. And honesty sometimes requires difficult conversations. Today is one of those moments. As Secretary General, I have often been asked whether NATO fears change. My answer has always been the same. No. NATO has never feared change. We fear instability. They are not safe. Change can create opportunity. Stability destroys opportunity. Our task is not to prevent history from moving forward. Our task is to ensure history moves toward peace rather than conflict. Yesterday, we declared that we no longer regard the Soviet unions as an advisory adversary. Those words were not chosen lightly. Some questioned whether such language was premature. Others believed it was overdue. I believe it was necessary. Real necessary.